Okay, so a couple of big things have happened today, right? We saw Fable just this morning being export controlled by the US government, citing security issues. Why? Because there seems to be some sort of rhetoric in which, quite interestingly, the US says that the guardrails of Fable 5, the premium Claude Anthropic model, can be mitigated against. In other words, it can be broken. Now, this is quite an interesting bit of information because, well, it still makes mistakes. So, yeah, interesting news there. And that happened yesterday on the 12th of June 2026 at 5:31 ET. So, interesting news all round. Now, let's get into something a little bit more interesting in terms of AI news. It turns out, according to my notes, that AI productivity is measured in hours which have been taken away from project managers and people managers. What do I mean by this? So essentially, perhaps you have a little cohort of people, you go and give them the news, the one-to-ones, explain Agile, probably coach as a Scrum Master. All good stuff. But apparently the rhetoric is that if I utilize AI on the mundane things, I can save 6 hours to 8 hours on things like one-to-ones. It can help me. But empowering the employee is something which is still a problem. Especially when it comes to things like productivity. Now, as you may know, if you followed my stuff on LinkedIn even. I was going to say YouTube. I do have YouTube. On LinkedIn, you may know that I have come to a bit of a conclusion around things like productivity around AI and, more importantly, return on investment. So how do you gauge productivity when using AI? Now, one of the things that came out of this meeting was the time, right? The time saved. Now, I have certain gripes with this because I think it depends on your level of experience. For example, if you're an experienced developer, right, it can save you quite a lot of time when combined with the knowledge. Like I've talked about before, fundamentals are key, right? Fundamentals are key. Now, there are certain cases whereby, that's not necessarily the case. For example, my experience with monitoring solutions is only such that I understand vaguely about what's happening. For example, with Grafana dashboards are written in YAML. So I can understand, for example, the way that key value pairs are seen inside of a YAML file, right? Based upon basic prerequisite knowledge on something like Kubernetes. Yeah? So it makes sense. But in terms of justifying that with AI, it's a little bit more tricky. For example, a complex problem may say, well, you take a community dashboard from Grafana and then say, right, okay, well, it should work with what I have. Yes, in theory. But it rarely comes out that these particular templates are templated towards a particular complex solution. Yes, you may have the black box exporter. Yes, you may have Tempo. Yes, you may have Loki. Yes, you may have Jaeger, right, to name a few, right, as your data sources into Grafana. But the actual data being exported may not necessarily match what is written for those community dashboards. Now, that's where I think a good use of AI comes into play, because it'll be tedious and a bit more laborious for me to go around and say, right, all these dashboards which I have, now I need to go in and then, make fine adjustments. But if I can get a script which gives me the essence of what's being exported in order to help me adjust my logs, now I can create unit tests against what's being exported and also against my dashboard to ensure that synthetic data works. So that way, when I look at my dashboard, now I can see everything has some sort of data going into it, verifying whether or not the dashboard is working. See, that's a good use of AI because it has tangible benefit. Another good use, for example, is if I'm a junior, for example, and I'm looking to delve into certain solutions, right, for a particular problem. Now we're getting into play. But for some reason, a lot of people, and unfortunately within the management sphere, seem to negate this, and that's not necessarily their fault. This is just because the management training, the project management, the Scrum Master, the product owner-based training doesn't cover technical analysis of what something like a developer would go through, because they are explicitly instructed not to help them create the increment, which is kind of a bit counterintuitive, because a Scrum Master is seen as the lead, and I'm quoting here, this is literally what it says, a true leader within an organization capable of delivering coaching. That's a Scrum Master. Make it make sense. But there we go. So, how do we determine the right values in which AI can be measured when used in an organization? Now, as I've mentioned before, token usage, cost per token, time to market, all of that stuff is really, really good. Really, really good stuff. But I would turn around and say, well, was it taking longer to build the product on a certain stack, 2 years ago, in comparison to what is being done with AI now, to the point that it is a working solution with favorable documentation? With favorable documentation, that's the sort of thing that I would be looking into. Doesn't matter if I'm a founder, project manager, somebody that works with tech, because it's an important metric. What I'm saying is, it's not about moving fast and breaking things. That entire rhetoric, I don't understand that rhetoric in tech. Because it literally says, all the tech leaders say this, working solutions are favored over documentation. It's a working solution, right? But yet, as a developer, if we break things, we're penalized for this. So there can't be this dichotomy of working solutions and breaking things, because it doesn't make business sense in anyone's mind, right? The one that wins is going to be the working solution, right? Because it makes more business sense. If I'm delivering to a customer, the customer wants something that works. We've seen this in multiple cases. For example, with Microsoft. I'm not saying Microsoft software is good or bad. I'm saying that the general rhetoric, based upon the news, is that when AI is not used within its current capacity, or poorly understood, then it can lead to software which is suboptimal. Right? This is what I'm saying. Right. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about with the hard stuff, right? So some notes that I have here is around capacity. Freed up capacity. Now, it is true within Agile that capacity is planned, right? There is something called capacity planning. So, for example, you get your developers and you say, right, okay, this is what we think during the planning, what is going to happen, right? So you have your burn down chart, you go through your burn down chart, perhaps you're doing a different type of planning. I forget the other one. There's another type of planning as well, which involves not having burn down charts and that kind of thing. I think it's called capacity-based planning, but I can't remember exactly. But basically, what happens is each individual developer, plays to their strength and then adapts depending on the cross functionality of the team. But the interesting thing is that when doing so, some developers can become a little bit overwhelmed with what's happening. So again, it becomes difficult to justify the use of AI there, based upon capacity, because, well, again, how do you determine the metrics around capacity? Just saying that, okay, well, it took us 2 years, now it takes us 2 weeks. That's a really good metric, but how do you justify everything else around it? Like, did it take less time for research? Was there a better understanding of what the code represented and what it means? Were other metrics in place, right? How many errors did we get? Did we have more errors than we did before? Are the merge requests failing sort of PR reviews? Are automated AI PR reviews accurate? All these different questions would allow a founder or an organization to understand what is going on when creating SaaS products or software solutions. Because that's what's important, right? Especially when creating good software, right? Is that, what is the speed in which my application runs? Right? Are we hosting correctly? Are there security measures in place? These sort of questions. And these sort of metrics can give us really good insights. Really good insights, not only for the developer, which is on that side, but also for the managers and the directors in the other side of the organization. So that was my little lightning talk there, 11 minutes in. If you have any questions, anything, or if you want to get in contact with me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. Just send me a DM or a comment within the comment section, and I will gladly get back to you. No problems there. All right. So I hope this has been a fun one. It's been informative, and I'll see you in the next one.